so we're going to get started with our second half of our day. It's much shorter, so we're letting y'all off the hook a little earlier today. So, yes, you're welcome. So, again, just want to acknowledge our full day sponsors, which are UVU, Utah Valley University, and Threaded Logo. And then also take note of our keynote speaker, the June Sucker Recovery Implementation Program. The June Sucker Recovery Implementation Program, multi-agency effort, represents successful working model, engaging local stakeholders, residents, business owners, policymakers, civic leaders, and scientists in a multifaceted effort to balance water resources needs for humans with species recovery efforts for the June Sucker and Utah Lake. Saving the June Sucker is about developing and maintaining the health of Utah Lake for all of those who use it. In an ever-increasingly crowded valley, Utah Lake has emerged as a prized asset for local residents who enjoy many recreational activities on the lake, like fishing, birding, boating, beautiful trail systems, and nature viewing activities. The June Sucker Recovery Program's efforts include the three following major initiatives: managing non-native fish species, augmenting the June Sucker population and monitoring, and developing and maintaining an ideal habitat for the June Sucker. So thanks to these guys, all of our sponsors who have made this possible. It's been a big push to make sure that this gets done in such a great manner, and you guys all have such a good time. And now we're going to introduce our keynote. So Dr. Ben Abbott is a global ecologist at Brigham Young University and the executive director of Grow the Flow. He has worked on global water security projects around the world and has developed expert assessment methodologies for basic and applied research. He has led major He has led major studies on air pollution impacts, permafrost degradation, global wildfire, and water policy. Dr. Abbott was the leading voice in efforts to prevent Utah Lake's dredging, and in 2023 was the head author of a report on Great Salt Lake that received international attention. So I will hand the floor over to our keynote, Dr. Ben Abbott.
Thank you, Addie, and thank you, everyone. I'm really honored to be in this room with the people doing the real work. I just play a scientist on television nowadays, and so I want to acknowledge everybody that's here and the not just years, but decades of work that's gone into Utah Lake. I'm happy to take questions or challenges during the presentation. If you do want to sue me, wait until the end of the presentation, though. So. I wanted to acknowledge the many funding sources that have supported our work through the years, and I love this picture of Utah Lake and the moon and the valley. Could we get some mood lighting in here? Is it possible to turn the front lights down? It's afternoon, so if people want to sleep, that's also totally fine. I want to ask a non-rhetorical question to start out. Oh, I love it, you guys. That's great. What, in your opinion, are the most important environmental issues that we're facing today? Yeah. Climate change, a huge issue that affects food security, water security, our way of life, what kinds of trees we can grow in our cities, everything. Really important? Yeah. Okay, so changes in the number of people. I'd also add changes in amount of consumption. Right, if we look at really what's changing rapidly, global population is starting to stabilize, but if we look at consumption rate, that continues to rapidly increase. Yeah.
Supply and demand of water.
Okay, so water scarcity is an issue, not just here, but globally. And in fact, when I think of water, about 95% of the water that we use as a species is through our food system. So what we just ate today, right, that's embodied with water. And if we look around the globe, the great food-producing regions from the Midwest to the Indus River Valley in India, we're using more than is available, right? So we see that decline. Yeah?
Maybe this is cheating, but cynicism, the idea that like one person can't make a difference?
So I don't think it's cheating at all, right? There are changes in how we relate to each other that are really profound right now. Right? People feeling cynical, feeling taken advantage of by one another, people not being sure, does anybody have a family member, or maybe you feel this way, I just don't know where to look to know what's happening. Right? That short circuits, even if you've got values, you don't know what to do about it. Did I see a hand back there, Soren?
Pollution of land, air, water,
Yeah.
chemicals, solid materials,
Yeah.
toxics.
So pollution In some people's minds, that's a problem from the 1970s, but I'll show you it's actually the number one thing that I'm concerned about, right, when we look at the amount of premature death and disease happening all around the world. Yeah.
The other big one I haven't heard mentioned is the sort of umbrella of habitat loss, fragmentation.
Yeah.
Kind of related to everything.
Absolutely. No, so thanks for bringing that up. We call it in global ecology loss of biosphere integrity, if you want to be technical, but I actually prefer a different term that Dr. Diaz recently proposed, decline of life on Earth. So if we look at wild populations of fish, birds, mammals, reptiles, they have decreased by about 85%. We're living in a world now where only 4% of mammalian biomass isn't humans and our livestock, right? Imagine that, you guys. Our bodies and our cows, goats, sheep, chickens represent 96% of the vertebrate animal life on the planet. And that includes, by the way, whales in the ocean. Right, so we are really big, and the decline of life on Earth threatens all kinds of things, right? That's what provides the ecosystem services that provide every breath of air, every drink of water, every mouth of food, and of course our quality of life. You guys are great. If you'd asked me, here's what I would put up as the 4 most important issues. First, harm to human well-being from environmental pollution. This is 15 million premature deaths each year. That's more deaths than all violence, malnutrition, communicable disease combined. And we view those other issues as moral and humanitarian crises, but often we don't connect pollution. Right? Our unhealthy relationship with the Earth is literally killing us. Number 2, the decline of life on Earth. Number 3, the disruption of Earth's great cycles. This includes water, carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, even sediment. We now move at least 1,000 times more gravel, sediment, soil, rock than all natural processes combined. Imagine that, you guys. It sounds farcical, like that can't be true, right? All of the rivers, all of the glaciers, all of the landslides, we dominate the movement of materials on this planet now. And that's not neither good nor bad. It just means that how we do it matters, right? We've got to be really, really careful. And then finally, climate change. And I want to emphasize, I care about numbers 3 and 4 because of how they impact 1 and 2. So my values are actually all over here. How are humans doing? How is other life on the planet doing? Right? Venus has a climate that's really screwed up, but it doesn't have moral implications, right? Because there's not life there. So this is the Sustainable Development Framework that I'm sure many of us have seen that says we're looking for the intersection where environment, economy, and society overlap. As an ecologist, I think this framework is at best inadequate and at worst misleading. Here is the ecological view of these 3 systems. Everything that we do takes place in the Earth system. It's our home, right? You might call it the Earth. You might call it creation. You might call it our home. And then the economy is just one of many things that we're trying to do in society. So as we have questions about priorities and trade-offs, we have to be thinking about how does this ultimately affect our home? Not just today, not just even for this generation, but looking into the future. Because I know, because of what you're doing, that you care about these things, right? People don't go into watershed management and lake restoration. They don't run for mayor of Vineyard, or not Vineyard, but Linden, because you make a lot of money, right? You do that out of love and commitment to our community. So I want you to all become global ecologists. Here are the 4 laws of ecology. Number 1, everything is connected to everything else. And we mean that in a literal way in ecology. Number 2, everything must go somewhere. So this is the idea, there is no away. Right? We sometimes say, I'm going to throw that away. Well, that goes somewhere. If we're talking about water evaporating from Utah Lake, that doesn't disappear, it goes somewhere. Right? If we're talking about nutrients from our wastewater treatment plants, that doesn't disappear, that goes somewhere. Number 3, the most cryptic one, nature knows best. This is also sometimes called the law of unintended consequences. So if we see a natural system and we say, I'm going to re-engineer that, I'm going to change that, sometimes that's justified, but we should be humble, cautious, and careful, right, as we do that. And whenever possible, we should try to mimic natural systems. That's the most resilient way to manage these or I actually don't always like the term manage. I like the term participate. The way that we're going to participate in these ecosystems is hopefully by learning from what the natural world is teaching us. And then finally, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. And if you're a cool kid, you can use the acronym. Any cool kids in here? Let's say it all together. So you say TANSTAFL. So 1, 2, 3, TANSTAFL. Isn't that nice? So no matter what we do, we have an impact somewhere. We're not looking for some magical solution. There's not a silver bullet, right? Even though some of us got lunch today for free, others, somebody paid for it, right? It showed up here. Okay, so now let's get to the topic of my presentation. This is a postcard from the 1950s that shows everything you need to know about the state of Utah. We could probably spend the rest of the time just critiquing culturally what this is showing. Anybody notice anything that's missing from this postcard?
Utah Lake.
Utah Lake and no rivers. So we've got Sevier Lake down there. Obviously somebody in Illinois put this together, right? So I want us to look at the missing point in the middle, Utah Lake. The largest freshwater lake. We've spent a day and a half on this. Utah Lake has been the centerpiece, a crossroads of human activity for millennia, right? Long before European pioneers arrived here. Already, if you look at the indigenous groups, this was a crossroads, right, where many different groups passed by each other. The lake provides billions of dollars of ecosystem services a year. Now, this hasn't been rigorously quantified. But if you look at nutrient removal, climate regulation, recreational value, the number very quickly adds up, right? This is part of what creates the local oasis that we enjoy, the reason why so many people live here. Also, the lake is suffering, as most water bodies are, right? About 2/3 of water bodies globally are experiencing eutrophication, over-nourishment from nutrients. So nutrient loading, hydrological modification, and invasive species have compromised the lake ecosystem. This is an amazing paper by Palmer and Stewart. It's very short. I'd highly recommend you read it. It came out in 2020. But they were talking about how do we participate in ecosystems? And they came up with this continuum. On one end, you've got conservation. If you fail at conservation, you can try to restore the ecosystem. If you can't restore the ecosystem for whatever, why don't we try to reduce the impacts? And then if you can't do that, try to mitigate by creating a similar ecosystem somewhere else. The reason why they put this on a continuum was, on the left, these are typically the cheapest and most effective interventions. Wherever possible, if we can protect an already functioning ecosystem, that's going to take less active management, less investment of money. Also, the outcome is much, much, much more likely to be successful. Now, if we're in the restoration place, a bunch of questions come up. What should we be restoring towards? How much, right? When do we know if we're done? What should the time frame be? We all want Utah Lake to be healthy next year or by the Olympics. But I want to have one little quote from this paper. You probably can't read it here, but they write, "The projects with the poorest evaluation strategies generally have the most positive conclusions about the effects of restoration." So again, the farther we get to the right, the less sure we are that we're going to get an outcome that we want. Doesn't mean that it's not worth trying, right? But we should be conserving as much as we can and then restoring, then reducing impacts, then mitigating, right? That should be our priority. Utah Lake is a story of conservation and restoration. And I could have, there are 50 other groups that could have been recognized. But we really are talking about going all the way back to the 1930s, right, when the lake almost disappeared, completely dried up. Recognition by the local community, we've got to let more water flow to the lake. We can't just treat it like a reservoir, right? That was the beginning, I think, of recent lake restoration. And This is a rare case where we actually have good metrics of success. This is a few years old. Sorry, those of you at the June Sucker program. June Sucker are recovering. They've been downlisted. This is an analysis by Kaylee Tanner and others at BYU showing the concentrations of chlorophyll A in the lake. Since the 1990s, in the spring, summer, and fall, we've seen substantial decreases. This is attributable to the improvements in waste management, both from agriculture and from cities. Right now, there's a time lag there. It takes a while for the lake to recover. So another thing that I'm really excited about is people reconnecting with the lake. Here are just some pretty pictures of people enjoying the lake in different ways. Yesterday, the lieutenant governor referenced this painting down here by John Hafen from the 1890s. And it struck me how many pictures of the lake today actually are quite similar to that painting. Similarly, here's a postcard that shows Utah Lake, people sailing on Utah Lake. It's pretty similar to what we're starting to see again today. So these demonstrable, powerful impacts. This means that this model works, right? All you have to do is learn about the system, develop the policy, and then you fix the problem, right? Anybody who's worked in policy knows it's this easy. No, this is not correct. Managing or participating in these ecosystems is extremely complex. And there are two concepts. In the 1970s, this idea about a wicked problem came forward. In a wicked problem, it's hard to define. It's resistant to resolution. It's a system of systems. And actually, in this original paper, the quote is, "I like to call such systems a mess." That was the technical term in this 1970s science paper. These things are a mess, right? So complex. And this, very importantly, there are a limited number of attempts possible, right? We can't just go out and try everything on Utah Lake. Now, we've tried a lot, right? And we should always be looking at everything that's been tried. I'm thinking about, Joe, your presentation on let's spread some kind of oil across the lake to reduce evaporation, right? That happened. I can't remember. What year was that? 1960s hexadecanol, right? That was the hot idea then. Let's spread that out there, right? Ended up causing massive fish kills, right? Harming the June sucker population. So we have a limited number of attempts possible. And then Kelly Levine and her team more recently added additional factors for what we now call super wicked problems, which is a cool name, right? Time is running out. There's no central authority. We solved that one. Way to go, Utah Lake Authority. The solvers are also the causers, and then we're discounting future consequences. So these systems are really complex. And I like, rather than those three boxes, I like this figure that Terry Chapin and others have put together that recognizes policies and behaviors are actually just the tip of the iceberg. And they're largely a reflection of our values. What do we care about? So once the people connect with and value an ecosystem, it's almost inevitable that better policies will follow. So it's this bottom-up approach. And again, it's what I love is happening. So let's take a look at how these systems of systems have complexity. First of all, Utah Lake is a part of a much bigger watershed. So we got to think about how the lake interacts across scales. And then second of all, there are two lakes that exist. There's the lake that we can go out and measure and see and swim in and fish in. And then there's the lake that exists in people's hearts and minds. And so I'm going to be a little bit open and vulnerable here. I say that because I don't want anyone to feel criticized. My perception of Utah Lake has changed many, many times. That's a good thing, right, when we encounter new information. But I want to just tell you a story about the governor and Utah Lake. And I do not mean this as a personal criticism. In fact, I think that it reflects well on him ultimately. But this was a talk he gave at BYU just a couple of years ago, talking about Utah Lake. He was asked a question about what should we do with the management of Utah Lake. And he rattled off a bunch of problems. Right? These are all direct quotes from him. It's a disaster. Nobody goes there. Nothing's working. The state can't pay for it. right? Really, really declarative. And it was amazing to look at the data. We'd just come from the Utah Lake Symposium a couple years ago, and to say this does not on the planet are in decline. And there's about 120 of these lakes around the world, and there is not a single one that has been restored. So you might have heard of Mono Lake in California. That's as close as we have to a success story. That was simply the decline was stopped through a public trust lawsuit. 30 years later, the lake is still about 8 feet below where it should be. So it hasn't reached that level. So this is a huge problem. It's never been solved. Areas that have lost their lakes, remember that picture of the dust storm, have seen spikes of health conditions, and we're not just talking about asthma, as important as that is. In Iran, where Lake Urmia dried up, they saw spikes in 41 different health conditions, including 7 kinds of cancer, preterm births, neurodegenerative disease, right? This is our home that we're talking about. If our home gets dirty, polluted, then we suffer. So how are we going to fix it? Here are 3 rules of water security. This is put together by Rhett Larson, a water attorney who works at Arizona State University. And he says we need to understand water, rule number 1. How much is sustainably available? Right? Then we need to conserve water, eliminate waste, figure out how to flourish with less. And then third, after you've exhausted study and conservation, augment water as little as possible. And the reason why these are put in this order is the ones up top are preventative, scalable, they have co-benefits. The ones down at the bottom are reactive, they're not resilient, right? If you build a pipeline from the Pacific, all kinds of risks associated with that. And yet, so far, we've focused largely on these augmentation solutions. Right? We should cut down all the trees in the watershed so that the trees don't use so much water, and then we won't have to conserve so much. All right? Let's set aside that the science shows that doesn't actually increase water flows in our region, but that's okay. Let's re-engineer nature. Thankfully, many of these have been put to bed, but not all. And indeed, there still are serious discussions about major diking projects in Utah Lake. The reasoning being, okay, let's cut off Goshen Bay, for example, or Provo Bay, dry those out, then the lake won't, quote, use as much water. Well, we now know that about half, this is new data out of Utah State, about half of the rain and snow that fall in the valleys along the Wasatch Front come from Great Salt Lake and Utah Lake. The lake's not using water, it's recycling water, right? It is the source of our rain and snow. Right? So the solution isn't to re-engineer nature. Remember that ecological law, nature knows best. If we take that path, then we end up in a situation where the lakes are battling each other. Right? Are we going to cut off and sacrifice Utah Lake to refill Great Salt Lake? No, that's not what we're going to do. If we conserve, there are co-benefits. And the connection that I see is 1 million acre-feet of water is about how much water is in Utah Lake right now. So we need a Utah Lake's worth more water to flow to Great Salt Lake. Imagine if we focus on conservation in our part of the watershed and more of that water is flowing through Great Salt Lake or through Utah Lake. That is going to accelerate the lake's recovery. That's going to accelerate the Jordan River's recovery. Right? That is an example of a co-benefit. And then we solve both of these problems. So the same way that a coalition has come together around Utah Lake, our team at Grow the Flow has worked with Josh Romney to create a new group called Great Salt Lake Rising. And it has been amazing to see the support from individual citizens all the way up to some of the biggest businesses and families in our state. And we initially were talking about a commitment to a lake rescue by 2027. I put the Salt Lake Temple up here not only because I'm a member of this church, but because did you know that more people are expected to come to visit the Salt Lake City Temple when it reopens than will come for the Olympics? It's crazy. I had no idea. But they're expecting 5 million people to come over the course of that multi-month open house. So we wanted to be able to say in 2027 that we were going to refill the lake by the Olympics, this big announcement. Well, Great Salt Lake Rising, working with the legislature and governor's office, have now committed to that this year, right? Just last month. It was a joint resolution and commitment. And so now we're off to the races, right? But it is unprecedented The default outcome remains the lake will continue to fall unless we can figure out how to think like a watershed. Can our values shift? Can we start to reconnect with one another? And I feel a personal and moral responsibility to do this because both of these lakes have saved us in our past. Right? The June sucker in the 1850s, when my ancestors arrived here and didn't know how to raise crops, the June sucker saved those early colonies. Likewise, when crops were being eaten by the Mormon crickets, where did the seagulls come from? You can actually see it in the background of Minerva Teichert's painting. The reason why there are seagulls here is because the largest breeding colony of California seagulls is on Great Salt Lake, or it was, right? That colony is in peril right now. So do we have the values? Are we the kind of people that can say, yes, this is hard, and yes, we're going to do this? And I believe that the answer is yes. Thank you very much.